By Jane O'Brien, BBC News, Washington. Image copyright Getty Images. Image caption: The water contamination scandal in Flint, Michigan sparked protests. It was one of the worst water contamination scandals in recent U.S. history. In 2015, children living in Flint, Michigan, began suffering from rashes and mysterious illnesses. Independent testing found dangerous levels of lead in homes and schools, caused by chemicals in the water supply that corroded the pipes. Officials declared an emergency and residents were told to stop using tap water. They were given free bottled water and filters, but Eric Roy, a chemist living in Washington, D.C., didn't think regular filters would be capable of dealing with such high levels of lead. They wouldn't solve the problem, the 35-year-old says. So I started building high-capacity lead filters just as a charitable effort. I needed to do something. At the time he was working for a Boston company conducting chemical research for the U.S. military, but he set up a GoFundMe page for donations, and began assembling his water filters with a friend in the front room of his apartment. It was very grassroots, very organic, says Mr. Roy. We were buying stuff at retail, assembling it and shipping it to people's homes. Image caption: Eric Roy was determined to help people affected by water contamination. 2 years later, he has turned his charitable effort, Filters for Flint, into a rapidly growing company called Hydroviv with 11 employees and ambitious plans for expansion. After Flint hit the news, people started taking a closer look at their water and found that lead is a widespread problem in the U.S., he says. In the last couple of years alone, there have been numerous contamination scares. In 2014, there were 18 cities in Pennsylvania where experts said childhood exposure to lead-contaminated water was worse than in Flint. And in 2015, in Jackson, Mississippi, 1 in 5 homes exceeded government limits for lead in water. Replacing pipes can cost millions of dollars, which many cities can't afford. Even where that has happened, older homes may still have lead plumbing inside. Mr. Roy assesses the type and level of contamination by analyzing publicly available data. Image caption: The filters cost around $225 and contain replaceable cartridges. Once we identify the problem, we create a filter that's optimized for that water, he says. So if you're in an area that has very high levels of chromium-6, a carcinogenic chemical compound, well, make sure the filter has an extra capacity for chromium-6. If you live in a brand new house where there's no lead, but you have high levels of arsenic, well, make sure we favor the arsenic when we're designing and developing that filter. Filters cost around $225, 172 pounds, and replacement cartridges, which are needed every 6 months, cost $65. We can also test water if there is a discrepancy between municipal data and the Environmental Protection Agency, but we trust that the scientists for the most part are doing the right thing, says Mr. Roy. But water quality regulations in the U.S. are quite relaxed, and the public doesn't really understand them. We fill that gap with technology and information. Image caption: The firm has a small workforce. Mr. Roy has a Ph.D. in chemistry from the University of Maine, and started his first business, a consulting company, while he was still studying. I'm a bit of an anomaly in that I have a Ph.D. in science and I'm an entrepreneur, he says. Most scientists are not exposed to anything outside of academia while they're in grad school because their advisors have probably only worked in academia. There are universities and colleges right now trying to pierce that bubble, but a lot of those programs aren't led by entrepreneurs. They're led by people who study entrepreneurs, and that's a very different thing. But Roy says there are similarities between scientific research and running a business. Both entail a leap into the unknown, and can lead to discovery and learning. His first big lesson in business was learning how to delegate. I botched my first patent application, he says. Then I went to a patent attorney because intellectual property is a huge part of what we do, so you have to do that right. Image caption: The cartridges need replacing every 6 months. In the core part of the business, you need to be working with people who actually know what they're talking about. From giving away a few hundred water filters to people in Flint, Hydroviv now makes thousands of units in a small warehouse in Washington, D.C., and is close to turning over $1 million a year. As a business, we're 100% sustaining, and I'm most proud that we've never missed a payroll, Mr. Roy says. Even so, he doesn't take a salary himself, and instead lives off savings and doing consulting work. This enables him to invest Hydroviv's profits into research and development. He remains the sole shareholder but is talking to potential investors. The math is pretty straightforward. On average, every customer that we have refers 3 people. They are also repeat customers because they need to replace the filter cartridges. I definitely think this will be an 8-figure business in 5 years, says Mr. Roy. If not, then we've done something wrong.